A vibrant, successful life on the stage, in print, across countries and cultures. And yet, an intruder from the past haunts in unexpected ways. It may sound like fiction, but it is not. Carmen Aguirre is an acclaimed actor, author, and playwright, and her new memoir is called Mexican Hooker #1, and My Other Roles Since the Revolution. Welcome.
Oh, thanks for having me.
And it's a pleasure to meet you for the first time. So we were talking before we started taping, and I connected with the book in many ways. How did you realize that you were suffering from PTSD? And why did you start from that point in the memoir?
Yes, I realized I had PTSD because my instructors at theater school told me that I had PTSD. And
were you surprised when they said that? Did you know what it was? Like, were you?
I was surprised because I thought that I was completely over all the traumas in my life, even though I was only 22 years old, right? Mm-hmm. The arrogance of youth, right? Yeah. So that's the only reason I knew, is because they told me that I had PTSD within the first month that I was in theater school. And they told me that if I wanted to get through the program, that I had to go to therapy. Otherwise, I wouldn't make it through the program. So it was really thanks to theater school that I went and got all the therapy that I got and was able to heal from it. And in terms of why I started the book there, it's kind of where the first book left off. So Something Fierce leaves off when I'm, in my very early 20s, and the whole Chilean resistance thing falls apart. It was shortly after that that I decided to follow my calling, which was the theater, and go to theater school. So that's why I started it there.
And you call what were you suffering from as far as the PTSD? Because you call it the terror.
Yes. Well, the terror I referred to in Something Fierce and at the beginning of Mexican Hooker #1 is the terror of living in a state of chronic terror when I was in the Chilean resistance, right? The terror of being caught, tortured, and killed by the Chilean secret police. But it wasn't in reference to this childhood rape that I had suffered.
And throughout the book, you kind of weave in the rape. Why did you structure the book that way? Because you don't really get into the details until the end.
Yeah, I wanted the structure of the book to mirror the experience that I went through. So early on in the book, I referred to the rape as, orbiting my life, right? But far enough away that I could just kind of see it in the corner.
We're actually going to read that passage later on.
Okay. And then it crashes into my life until there's nothing I can do but deal with it. And the structure of the book mirrors that. So in the beginning, it's barely referred to, and then by the end of the book, it literally takes over the entire narrative, and that's all that happens in the book is the rape.
And you were attacked and raped by somebody called the paper bag rapist. Who is he?
So his name's John Horace Oughton, and he was referred to as the paper bag rapist because he would cover his victims' heads with a paper bag or blindfold us with an item of our own clothing so that we would never be able to identify him. And by his own admission, he attacked hundreds of children, and he was operating in Vancouver between 1978 and 1985, which is when he was caught.
And this rape had a huge effect on you, even though you suppressed it. How did it affect your relationships with men?
Well, it was, again, only through therapy that I realized the effect that it had on my relationships with men. Basically a real fear of intimacy, so sabotaging any relationship once real intimacy started to happen. Being attracted to people who treated me badly and being physically repulsed by people who treated me well.
Because that meant what? If someone treated you well?
It's a state of self-loathing, right? Where you really truly believe, it's a core belief that you do not deserve to be loved, right? So that if somebody is actually offering you love, you are repulsed by that. There must be something wrong with them.
And anything to do with you having to be vulnerable in return?
Yes, of course, right? Which has to do with the intimacy part, right? Like in order for there to be real intimacy, you have to be vulnerable. And that was a very scary place for me. And then also it affected my relationships in the sense of being very controlling, having to be in control all the time, which is exhausting.
It must be exhausting.
Yeah.
What about your family? How did it affect the relationship with your family?
The relationship with my family was fine. It's more about how it affected them, how it affected my parents, right? So my father to this day won't talk about it. It's too painful for him. And my mother, who was out of the country when this entire thing happened, so she wasn't there for any of it, right? I think she just feels guilty because of that.
Guilty because she wasn't there
Because she wasn't there, yeah.
I wanted to read you a passage from your book, which
Sure.
is very intimidating. But I remember after I read it, I just put amazing on the side and then Colin, the producer, also had the same idea. And you write, as for the rape, it was like a satellite orbiting my life, part of my northern narrative, far enough away that we didn't share the same air, but visible on a clear day or night. Gravity didn't threaten to pull it through the atmosphere and crush it into me. Hence, it was not on my radar as a trauma to look at, but merely as a phenomenon to observe from afar. What did it take for you to heal from the trauma?
Basically, I finally, so I started, like I said, I started therapy when I was 22 in theater school, and I basically unloaded the entire story of the rape in the first session, thinking that after that session I was over it.
You've dealt with that.
Because I unloaded it, right? And then I never talked about it again with the therapist, right? With that particular therapist. And then it wasn't until I was about 30 when it was the end of yet another relationship that I had completely sabotaged and destroyed that I thought, okay, I'm the common denominator here in all these relationships. I need to look at this, right? So, but again, it was years of therapy for me to finally go, you need to go and really, really deal with this. And I found a fantastic therapist who wouldn't let me sidestep it, right? He kept bringing me back to it. So it was, again, in my early 30s that I finally dealt with it. And the first thing that meant was to cry over it. I had never cried over it, ever.
Because of the day after the rape, you went back to school?
Yeah, so I cried during the rape and then right afterwards when I was in a state of shock. And then I literally never cried about it ever again. So that was the first thing, to let myself fall apart. And it seemed endless, that part of the healing process, because I cried every day for 2 years. Every single day. And I've never used painkillers, right? So I've never done drugs, not even marijuana. I've never drunk alcohol. I've never used painkillers, right? So
you couldn't numb yourself.
What's that?
You couldn't numb yourself.
Yeah, no, I didn't. I was not interested in numbing myself, even though I had never cried about it. But yeah, so once I started crying, I just cried for 2 years straight, which was incredibly painful, but also healing.
And you write, you were talking about the rape and you said there was beauty in it. What did you mean by that?
Well, because the attack itself lasted for 3 hours, there was a lot of time to contemplate the end of my life because I really thought that was the end of my life. I mean, it was a rape at gunpoint. He spent 2.5 hours before the actual rape happened psychologically torturing my cousin and I, telling us all the ways he was going to kill us. The most graphic being that he was going to chop us up with an axe and then bury us at the bottom of the forest in a plastic bag so that we would never be found by our parents. And then talked a lot about the gun. And, well, he held the gun to my head for the entire time. So because we were in the woods, you know, we were in nature, and it was the woods that I grew up in. So there was a beauty, and really, like when you really believe it is the end of your life, it is true that your entire life flashes in front of you, and that that really gets you present, right? Like, talk about living in the present moment. Nothing will do that to you more than thinking, this is it, right? So there is a beauty in that, right? And really...
and surviving it too?
Well, yeah, and also in appreciating your life, you know, when you think it's coming to an end.
And you met your rapist. How was that experience?
Well, it was incredible. I mean, I met him under 2 years ago, so it was quite recent, and it was 33 years after the attack. I never saw him during the attack because he did blindfold me. I never went to trial. I was out of the country when the trial happened, so it's not like I even went to watch the trial, which lasted for 6 months, and it was, as you can imagine, sensational trial in Vancouver at the time, like in the news every day. And then I did start to go to his parole hearings 21 years ago. So that was the first time I was in the same room with him again since the rape. But I never got to look into his eyes because, you know, I would see the back of his head or his profile at the parole hearing. So,
why was it important for you to look in his eyes?
To even out the power imbalance between us, you know, to meet on my own terms and to really just look at him, to look at this man in the face. The man I'd been in a relationship with for my entire life. So it was amazing to meet with him because although I already felt a lot of compassion for him.
You felt compassion for your rapist?
Yes, I've always felt compassion for
him.
Why? Yeah, I've never felt hatred or anger towards him.
But he attacked you and he stole away your,
yes.
You know, he brutalized you.
Yes, but I first of all, he doesn't care if you hate him or you're angry at him. So you're only hurting yourself with those feelings. And if you want to be happy, you need to feel compassion. Otherwise, you're not going to be happy. So it really had nothing to do with him and everything to do with me.
And you always knew that?
Yeah, I even knew that in the moment when it was happening. So
where do you think that comes from? Because I think anger, hurt, most emotions. I mean, those are the emotions that I've experienced.
Right. Yeah.
So in that moment to even be compassionate towards him, where do you think that comes from?
Well, rape is a very intimate crime. It is the most intimate crime, right? It is a person using their body, as their naked body, as a weapon against your naked body. And their heart is against your heart. It's very, very taboo to talk about that, to talk about the intimacy of rape. But when I was a child and I had this man who is the most cold-hearted criminal I've ever come across in my life, and I've come across a few during the dictatorship in Chile, I remember feeling his pain. Wow. And knowing that there must be something very, 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 very sad about this person who would go out and be cruel to children, which to me, there's nothing worse that you can do, right, is commit crimes against children. So even though I was a child and I was the victim of that, in the moment I knew that he was a very sad human being. And so I did feel compassion for him. And what surprised me about meeting him is that compassion grew even more after spending 5 hours talking to him. And I want to be very clear here. I'm not saying that I think he should be out of jail or anything like that. I think he is exactly where he should be, and that he is a cold-hearted criminal who should never be out of jail. And it's not about forgiving his crimes, or saying that his crimes are okay, right? It's just about how I feel and how that helps me to be a happy person.
Has this experience given you any insights into how sexual assault survivors are treated by the justice system?
Well, I mean, my assault happened in 1981, so that's a very long time ago, before a lot of that changed for the better, right? So when it happened to me, I mean, the way that I was treated by the police was horrifying. Not the individual police officers, they were literally just doing their jobs. But, you know, there I am in the police station in a state of shock. And I don't know if you know what that looks like, but basically you're shaking so uncontrollably you can't sit, you can't stand, you can't, your entire body is shaking. You can barely speak because your jaw is shaking so much. I'm bleeding. It's just snot and tears. And nowadays it would be considered almost criminal, right? To have a child.
And you were by yourself most of the time.
Yes, to have a child standing there in that state and pull out a piece of paper and start asking questions by rote. What were you wearing? Are you sure it was rape? Did he hurt you? Is that what you were wearing? Well, what did you think was going to happen? Why were you in the forest? That was the treatment. I could go on, right? I know that has changed 35 years later now. I'm not exactly sure what happens now. I know it is much better.
As an actor, I'm wondering how that experience shaped the way you see sexual assault portrayed in film and television.
Yeah, I mean, I wrote a play, anyway, it was produced in 2005, so a long time ago. called The Trigger, which is about rape. And the reason that I did that is because I was always so angry about how rape is portrayed, mostly on screen, on the big and small screen. Because it's sexualized, because it's titillating, and because the rapist is portrayed as a monster, a one-dimensional monster, so we can distance ourselves from him. And the victim is portrayed as a one-dimensional victim. And usually these stories are about the rapist, as if that's the interesting character, right? So for me, I always knew that I wanted to challenge that with an art piece of my own. I just didn't know exactly how I would go about doing that. You know, very easy to criticize, but then how do you do it yourself? And it took me many years to come up with an image that was the way in for me to write The Trigger, which in the end, in The Trigger, I play myself and the rapist. And I try to make him as complicated a human being as I can.
Speaking of Trigger, right now, when you do read articles online or before a show that might take somebody into that place if they were there before, what do you think about trigger warnings? Are they necessary?
No, I don't agree with them.
They're not necessary?
No.
Why do you think that we seem to be so, I guess, right now concerned about trigger warnings?
I think that we've gone a little bit too far in portraying ourselves as victims. You know, like it is your personal responsibility to heal from trauma, and there will be triggers all around us all the time. I don't know. To me, it's the equivalent of, you know, if you're an addict and you go to Alcoholics Anonymous or Narcotics Anonymous, the answer is not to tell the entire world to not drink and not take drugs because it might trigger you to be in that environment, right? You are on a healing process. And in your healing process, you're going to come across bars. For example, you're going to walk by a bar where people are drinking. It is not the responsibility of the bar to shut down because you're an addict, if you know what I'm trying to say. Again, I think it's very complicated, and I understand why trigger warnings exist. I don't agree with them.
Now, the path that led you to, I guess, facing what happened to you was what you call the calling. You say you fell in love with acting when you were 3.
Yes.
What was it about acting that drew you to it?
Well, I remember I went to see a circus. My parents took me to see a circus when I was 3, and I remember the image of a woman in a bikini standing on a galloping horse that was going in a circle. And it's not that I wanted to be in a bikini on a horse, but the feeling that I had watching that was so inspiring to me, right? In terms of, I was scared, but I was also excited, and I could really, really appreciate the skill that it took for her to do that and the risk that she was taking. And I knew that that's what I wanted to do, that I wanted to be an actor.
Now, you go into this prestigious acting group in Vancouver, and one of your teachers tell you that, are you sure you want to pursue this because you're just going to be marginalized in certain roles? Going back to Mexican Hooker #1. And you actually had a role called Mexican Hooker.
Well, that's why I called the book that. I mean, I come by the title honestly. And yes, I did play Mexican Hooker #1 in a movie. And the other reason I called the book that is because the rapist called me a hooker over and over again during the rape. I was also a phone sex operator for a very short stint right after theater school. I think the title also points to the humor in the book, that even though it deals with very dark subject matter, it is also very funny. There are very funny passages in it.
Yes, you have a bladder. Yes. All those stories have me rolling on the floor.
And then also, I think it also points to the title also points to the underlying outrage in the book of the sexism and racism in the film, TV, and stage industries.
And you brought something up that we were talking about before when the rapist called you a hooker. When you did meet him and you met some of the other victims, you realized that it wasn't your fault. So all along you felt it was your fault? Why?
Yes, like most rape victims, I felt it was my fault, especially when you're a child and the rapist is telling you it's your fault. Yeah, I thought that I had brought it upon myself. This is happening within a much larger context, as we know, of patriarchy, of of women led to believe that they are sexual objects, that we are sexual objects, and that we are constantly titillating men just by walking around, right? So that it is our fault. So yeah, that's a very common feeling to have when you're being raped. And I have to say that men feel the same way, right? I know a lot of men who have been raped and sexually abused and sexually assaulted, mostly as children and as teenagers, and they also feel that they were at fault.
What did it mean for you to meet the other victims?
Oh, it was incredible to form a community, because there's so many victims of the paper bag rapist, to form a community of people who had gone through the exact same thing. So there's nothing to explain. You know, we understand each other, you know, how do you say that? Just, again, without explaining, without having to explain anything. And some of those women are my closest friends to this day.
And I want to bring it back to acting. What drew you to theater?
Well, I didn't know what theater was because I had gone to the circus when I was 3, but then when I was around 4 or 5, my mother, this was during Allende's socialist government in Chile, formed or joined a theater troupe that was an agitprop theater troupe. So that's agitational propaganda theater troupe. And basically what they would do is they would drive around the south of Chile, which is where we were living, and through theater, well, basically put on plays explaining what the socialist government was doing in the country in terms of the agrarian reform, the literacy campaign, etc.
Now, you were an outspoken Chilean revolutionary / dissident. Do you think art can be a political act?
Yes.
How or why?
Well, basically that's how I was raised. I mean, most of the theater that I was exposed to when I was growing up was political, so I thought that's all it was. I thought that was what theater was there to do. Once I went to theater school, in theater school it was looked down upon. Political theater was looked down upon, was poo-pooed as not real theater. And politics was never discussed in theater school. The only acceptable political conversation to have in theater school was about freedom of speech and freedom of expression, and how that was the most important right that we have. Yes, and for me, I don't care about freedom of speech or freedom of expression. I really don't. It's not my bottom line.
What do you care about?
Justice, equality. I think there are so many things that are much more important than freedom of speech and freedom of expression. So it was really hard for me to go through theater school and to have it be completely apolitical. And when you are putting on, like if you are a theater company who programs in Canada right now, let's say in Toronto right now, you are a theater company who receives a lot of public funding, so taxpayers' money, and you program a season with 100% of the plays written by white people and directed by 100% white directors, you are making a very, 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 very obvious political statement, which is a white supremacist political statement in a city like Toronto, where such a huge portion of the population is not white.
And you've actually told people who've come up to you, if they were women of color or immigrants, that if you want to be an actor or be in theater, you have to create your own roles.
Yes, and I continue to say that to when I teach acting. That's the first thing I say to all my students. You know, especially the students of color and the women of color. If you want work, you've got to create your own roles. Just a year ago, Canadian Actors Equity Association, our union, conducted a census, and the findings were dismal. You know, the findings were that right now in Canada on stage, of all the people we see on stage, only 3.7% are women of color. And of that 3.7%, almost none, so it's like 0.01% are playing lead roles.
You're kidding.
No, so again, you know, the struggle continues.
Well, what about Hamilton? The musical.
Yes, well, I mean, again, that's the example that we keep going, see, it can be done.
Right,
This is all that has to happen.
Well, you spent time in Los Angeles. How would you characterize the theater scene there?
Well, the theater scene that I was a part of in Los Angeles was very exciting to me. It was mostly Latino, very experimental, and working with people or being exposed to people's work who are considered the most successful, mostly Chicano theater artists in the United States. So it was such a relief. Like, I basically wept so much when I was in LA because I was so happy.
You felt like you felt like you belonged?
I felt that I belonged. I had finally found an arts community that understood me and that I understood, right? Because it was basically Latino theater work.
Your book has come out at a time when more and more sexual assault survivors are coming forward and sharing their stories. What do you hope your book will add to the conversation?
Well, I never write a book hoping that it will add anything. I mean, if somebody wants to pick up the book and read it and they're entertained by it, then to me that's already a huge success. Even just the fact that we're having the conversation is enough. Like, as you can imagine, I've received many, 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 many messages from people around the world telling me their story of being raped or sexually abused or assaulted after hearing about the book or reading the book, and telling me that many of those people have told me that it's the first time they're even talking about it in the actual message to me. So if that's what's happening, then I feel that that is already a huge thing.
Well, thank you for writing it. It's fantastic.
Thank you.
And yes, thank you. And it's been a pleasure meeting you.
Thank you for having me.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit TVO.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.